Have you ever wondered what it means when you see these flower stalks developing on the top of your onions? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Bolting onions. We're going to talk a little bit about why it happens, what you can do when it happens, and also ways to help keep it from happening again. But if we haven't met before, my name's Angela from Growing in the Garden, and I love to share garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your own garden. So what does it mean when your onion suddenly develops a flower stalk? Starts little and then it shoots up, and before you know it, it's taller than the plant and forming lots of little flowers all over it. A bulb on the top center stalk of an onion means that it has begun the process of flowering and making seeds. We call that process bolting. What is bolting and what does that mean? Basically, it means that your onion has gone from producing a big, nice, fat bulb into shifting its energy and production into producing that flower stalk and those seeds. When onions bolt, the bulb part of the onion stops getting any bigger and it puts all of its efforts and energy into making that flower stalk and those seeds. So why do onions bolt? That's the million-dollar question. Well, onions bolt basically because they're under stress. So what causes stress in onions? All kinds of things. Heat, cold, too much water, not enough water, all of those things can stress out an onion, and in response, it will send up a flowering stalk. Temperature fluctuations can also cause onions to bolt. That's what I'm blaming this year's massive amount of bolting onions on. This spring, we had warm temperatures followed by cool weather, which may have encouraged the onions to go a bit dormant. And then, when we heated back up, that made the onions think they were in their second season, and boom, they formed those flower stalks. So what do you do when your onions bolt? Once you see that the onion is bolting, you can harvest and use or preserve the onions right away. Your next option is to cut off that flower. You can either cut it off at the top or cut that stalk all the way down so the onion stops producing seeds. The onion won't continue bulbing or getting any larger, but it buys you a little bit of time to use the onions. So in the case of bolting onions, you are not going to want to wait until those outer leaves turn brown and the onion flops over. If you wait that long to harvest, then that onion is going to rot or get woody. If you'd like, leave a couple of bolting onions to flower until they produce seeds. Save the seeds to plant next season. So what is the best way to use bolted onions? You can use them just like regular onions. You can use them right away in cooking and fresh. So you're going to need to store onions that bolted differently than you would store regular onions. Typically with onions, you wait for those tops to flop over, you leave them in the ground for a little bit, and then you cure them inside. That process makes those onions last for several months. But with bolted onions, you will need to use them or preserve them in different ways right away. So here are a few different methods to preserve bolted onions. You can chop them up and freeze them. You can also slice them up and dehydrate them. So once that onion is completely dehydrated, you can store those pieces in a jar. You can also process that dehydrated onion into powder. The third way, and what I'm going to do with all of these bolted onions, is to freeze dry them. Freeze-dried onions can be used similar to fresh. You can also blend them into powder. Unfortunately, we can't control the weather and we can't always guarantee perfect onion growing weather. But there are a few things you can do to reduce the likelihood that your onions will bolt. First, choose onions suited to your climate. Onions are generally categorized into short day, long day, and intermediate day onions. Choose the right variety based on where you live. Plant onions at the correct time. It's not a guarantee that it will be the right temperature, but you have the best chance for success when you plant onions at the correct time for your climate. Use your local planting guide to find out when the best time is to plant for your area and follow those planting guidelines. And finally, onion sets, which look like little onions, those small bulbs, are much more likely to bolt than are onions grown from seed or transplant. This year, both my onions started from seed and from transplant had a really high bolting rate, which leads me to believe that the weather was the culprit this year. But using seeds or transplants generally gives you the best chance for success, especially in hot climates. I hope today's video answered your questions about why your onions are bolting, what you can do about it, and what to do with those bolted onions. Thank you so much for watching.